2016 has been a significant year for members of the Commonwealth, particularly those living in southeast Alberta. First, Her Majesty the Queen celebrated her 90th birthday on April 21st, and just a couple of months later, Canadian Forces Base Suffield marked its 75th anniversary. This area acts as home base for hundreds of Canadian and British soldiers, scientists, researchers, and civilians. Today, Suffield has three main tenants: the Canadian Armed Forces, British Army Training Unit Suffield, or BADIS, and Defence Research and Development Canada, or DRDC. But what is primarily recognized as an active military base right now actually started solely as a research area during the Second World War.
In 1941, the Allies needed a place to practice, to learn to understand the chemical warfare that they thought might be used against them. The British used to have a place to do this work in Africa, but that was no longer a safe place to work. So the Government of Canada worked with the British at that time and established in 1941 Experimental Station Suffield at that time, which rapidly became the Suffield Experimentation Centre, and then through its different names to now Suffield Research Centre.
Gary says the work done by those Canadian and British scientists has long been classified, as the research they were doing was based on what information the Commonwealth's enemies potentially had to use against them.
You're working with the most dangerous agents that could be used in warfare that anyone could conceive of, and that also is something you want to do that safely, but you don't want to tell people about that as much because you could instill less confidence and fear, and you always worry about what's the balance. But the reality is that we've supported operations right from when we were first established. We've supported the Canadian Forces in making decisions relevant to their operations, and we've provided equipment, capability, tools to the Canadian Forces over our entire history to address all of those issues, be it protection from chemical agents, biological agents, homemade explosives, improvised explosives in theater in Afghanistan. All of that work was done. A lot of that work was done here with the other labs across the country in order to support our Canadian Forces and make a difference.
Over the years, the area northwest of Medicine Hat had several name changes, eventually landing on Defence R&D Canada in the year 2000. As for the military component of the base, that came about in 1971 when the Canadian Armed Forces arrived on scene. Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel John Scott says the area, which spans nearly 2,700 kilometers and is half the size of Prince Edward Island, makes an ideal location for training in mechanized warfare.
So moving a tank across country, firing at the enemy and then maneuvering around so they don't get shot as well. So great training for sort of mechanized groups. My first exposure to CFB Suffield was back in, say, 1999. I was here down on exercise with Canadian troops.
But as most Hatters know, this Canadian military base is unique, as it also acts as a training ground for hundreds of British soldiers each year, offering space for armored, infantry, and artillery live-fire exercises. BADIS moved its operations onto the base in 1972. CFB Suffield is said to be the largest military training base in Canada and one of the largest in the Commonwealth. But it's not just military activity that uses the land. Lieutenant Colonel Scott says $4 billion worth of oil infrastructure is located on the base, mostly underground, along with a protected national wildlife area home to several at-risk species.
So the National Wildlife Area is a component of the base that is off limits to public and military training. So we have a very robust sort of permit system in which the applications are put forward to folks that say want to do research, because it's a very diverse biological environment. You've got a number of species at risk that live in there, namely snakes and a number of, say, kangaroo rats and that sort of stuff. So a lot of environmental, either biologists or other qualified folks want to do studies of those things. So we allow them in there to make sure that we have that biodiversity continuing and that the ecosystem is sustainable.
Of course, having thousands of people move through this active base each year, Lieutenant Colonel Scott says Suffield has also acted as an economic stabilizer for southeast Alberta, with more than $150 million being brought into the Redcliffe and Medicine Hat economies from base visitors or staff members living in town and commuting to work. For Go on Shaw TV, I'm Christy Pick.